Where does power come from in democracy? Well, if your civics teacher indoctrinated you well enough, you might say that that is a stupid question, that it is obvious, it's in the name, demos, people, and kratos, power. Therefore, at least according to theory, the power comes from the people. The people elect the politicians that will be in charge of the country, and therefore they are the supreme power within the state. In a democracy, popular opinion is the force behind all political movements and what gives a government its legitimacy. So we must ask ourselves, where do we get our political opinions from? Most of our opinions we form organically from our experiences, from our daily lives. Most people have strong opinions when it comes to food, music, the people who they like and dislike, because they eat, listen to music, and socialize every day. However, most people are not in charge of geopolitical matters or managing the economy. So how can they form an opinion when they have no personal experience with such matters? The answer is that they do not form any opinions about these matters, but instead they adopt them from people who they trust. These very people will be the topic of this essay, experts. This is the case when we are reading a newspaper, when we're watching a YouTube video, when we are even reading a book about it. At the end of the day, we always defer our opinion on matters on which we have no personal experience. To quote Walter Lippmann, "Except on a few subjects where our knowledge is great, we cannot choose between true and false accounts. So we choose between trustworthy and untrustworthy reporters." So, when it comes to politics, most of our opinions are not really our own. They are the opinions of the people who we trust. This is important because in a democracy, whoever is seen as credible will be trusted, and therefore they will have great power over public opinion. In this sense, elections are much less about the candidates and the policies and much more of a question of who you trust. To quote Curtis Yarvin, quote, "There is no way to receive a mainstream university education, read the Times every morning, trust both of them, and not be a progressive." End quote. The same, however, could also be said of the Fox News watching conservative, and this leads us to the conclusion that when it comes to democratic politics, public trust is the most essential resource there is. In other words, he who controls what information is seen as credible also controls how people think. And here we arrive at the central question of this essay. Where does credibility come from? Each one of these experts will try to give the appearance of being completely impartial and completely credible. But in my opinion, there is no such thing as an impartial expert in the fields of politics, philosophy, and economics, because these experts have the power to influence public opinion. This power very often corrupts because at the end of the day, the expert is still a person, is still human, and is still part of an institution. All of these have interests. Not all experts are biased, mind you. Mathematicians, chemists, and other experts that are generally not connected to politics can actually be impartial because they have no power to influence the politics of their nation through their professions. In fact, you can look at Soviet and Nazi mathematics, and you could not spot any bending of reality. Their social sciences, on the other hand, are less reliable. But when we look at fields that are not scientific, such as politics or economics, despite poli-sci and economics majors denying this fact to their very last dying breath, we will find it difficult to stay grounded in reality. We cannot perform replicable experiments to confirm or refute a certain claim. Therefore, we are left with nothing but the interpretations of these experts who claim to be scientific and objective. The key thing that we must mention here is that people trust institutions far more than they trust individuals. Indeed, most experts are experts due to two facts: that a university gave them a piece of paper, and that a prestigious newspaper has indirectly endorsed them by giving them a platform. Trust in an institution is something that is circular. If I ask somebody who reads the New York Times why they think that the New York Times is credible, they will say that it is because they expose the truth, through good reporting, of course. However, what this person thinks is the truth depends on what the New York Times prints. And so we have a vicious cycle that we can observe not only in the New York Times, but in every single publication ever, from Pravda all the way to InfoWars. Once a person trusts an institution, they will also come to believe the narrative that this institution endorses, and to get a person out of this cycle is almost impossible. This is the reason why almost nobody is convinced by political arguments. They will not see your sources as credible, and you will not see theirs as credible either. However, it is important to mention that this cycle can only occur when a newspaper or a channel or whatever has an internally coherent ideology. Any publication that does not have a well-defined ideology will not be convincing because they will be unable to build a consistent and seductive narrative that will try to explain all the complicated current events in simple terms. Once a person believes in the narrative, they will believe that they have found the truth, and that they will interpret, and therefore they will interpret the world through this very same narrative. This cycle is repeated over and over, thousands of times, as long as this hypothetical person believes that this interpretation of the world is correct. The only thing that can break a person out of this cycle is a hard slap on the face. In other words, a person that is already a fanatic will remain a fanatic until reality forces him to see that something is not okay, and he starts asking some difficult questions to himself. So, this cycle is more of a spiral that either goes up when a person believes more and more fervently that they have the truth, or that it can go down when a person starts seeing that the things that he believes are not reflected in reality. So at the end of the day, credibility does come from truth, and those ideologies and institutions that wrongly interpret the world will sooner or later crumble. However, this is not instantaneous. Sometimes it takes whole generations of bullshit for the credibility of an institution to be lost. The best example of this in the 20th century is without a doubt the fall of the Soviet Union. Soviet leadership based their whole project on the premise that they were building a prosperous and classless utopia, and most people did believe it. However, this faith quietly crumbled between the contrast of reading that the Soviet Union was the vanguard of the revolution heading towards utopia, and the everyday reality of living in a stagnating economy. The credibility of Pravda and the Communist Party was lost little by little until there was nothing left. Now, we can ask ourselves, is the credibility of most universities and mainstream newspapers going up or down? Of course, this is a stupid question. If their credibility was going up, you wouldn't be here now with you. We are here because we are losing, or already have lost, our faith in the current narrative. Somehow reality does not seem to align with boomer progressivism. We are here because we are losing the trust that previous generations had placed on the experts, that we, of course, are supposed to see as authorities on political matters. And believe me, I've been through the whole process. Once upon a time, I was also a filthy liberal. But yet, through my life experience, I just felt that something wasn't right. At first, I didn't know what it was, but with time my opinion formed. And now I believe that our modern way of looking at things is fundamentally wrong, and that we will personally pay the price for it. The purpose of this essay is not to go into an indictment of the modern world, but I think that it is important to explain where I am coming from. The thing that, in my eyes, broke the credibility of liberalism is the fact, or of the current system if you'd rather, is the fact that almost all developed countries are not having enough children, and that this will result inevitably in demographic collapse. The worst part about this is that all of this was clear since the 70s, but it was just ignored. Instead, this incoming crisis has been left to us as a parting gift by the boomers. Right now, there are millions of people turning away from the liberal status quo. However, a good percentage of them are just doubling down with more radical progressivism or even socialism, the sort of people who believe that one spoonful of cyanide is bad, but two are good. Others are becoming completely uninterested in politics, and then there's us on the right that are looking for something else, but unlike the left, we have no unifying vision. So, we must ask ourselves, how can we create right-wing institutions that are credible enough to influence the narratives and appoint their own experts? Well, the same rules of the credibility cycle also apply to our side. If we want to descend and lose credibility, we must act as deranged as possible to make absolute fools out of ourselves. I think that will do a fine job at destroying any credibility that we could have had. If, however, we want to increase our credibility, we must take this cycle upwards. We must focus on quality and originality. I believe that an important part of this is not pretending that we are impartial experts on political matters. We are biased. We want to change the way that people think and how our societies work, and we must produce interesting content to do so. Progressivism was fresh in the 60s. Nowadays, it is beyond stale, and its credibility is withering away. This will provide fertile soil for new institutions with new narratives. The only question that remains to be answered is what these narratives will be.